The great assembly hall was vast enough to swallow a city whole. At its heart stood a single human being, Ambassador Chen Wei, dwarfed by thousands of alien delegates, seated around her in every direction. Massive holographic screens hovered above, casting her calm face across every corner of the chamber. That calm was strange, almost unsettling, for someone who was about to be judged by the most powerful governing body in known space. The presiding officer, a tall silver-scaled Vorath with 3 watchful eyes, rose from his high seat and unrolled an ancient floating data scroll. He announced, in a voice split instantly into 800 different tongues by translation devices, that humanity stood charged with crimes against galactic order. The list was long, settling 17 star systems without permission, undercutting established trade lanes with aggressive commerce, ignoring population caps the Council demanded, and worst of all, letting human culture spread unchecked to every species willing to listen. As he spoke, floating images played behind Chen showing humanity's expansion, colony worlds blooming with light, starships racing at speeds that made older civilizations nervous, human traders grinning and shaking hands with alien partners, human music drifting through foreign markets, and human food served on 1,000 different worlds. Ideas about liberty and individuality had spread among younger species like fire through dry grass. Chen absorbed all of it without a flicker of emotion. The council had spent months reviewing testimony from over 400 species and dissecting 2 decades of humanity's short but chaotic membership. When the vote came, 731 civilizations favored expulsion, while only 116 opposed it. The decision was final. The chamber erupted in a wash of alien sound, clicks, hums, satisfied chirps from the older races, and quiet distress from the handful of younger species that had grown close to humanity. The presiding officer called for silence and delivered the sentence. Every human embassy would close. Every trading post would be torn down. Every colony inside council territory would be emptied. Humanity had a single solar cycle to vanish, and afterward, roughly 70% of the charted galaxy would be permanently off-limits, with any human ship caught trespassing treated as a hostile target. He asked if she understood. Chen took a breath, aware that cameras were beaming her reaction to trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds, all wondering whether she would beg, threaten, or break down. Instead, she simply smiled, a small, genuine expression, the kind someone might wear upon hearing surprisingly good news. "We understand," she said evenly. "We'll be gone in 30 days. No appeal, no protest, nothing but calm acceptance." The room buzzed with confusion. Nobody had expected such a reaction. Before leaving, she turned back one last time and thanked the assembled representatives of 847 civilizations, wishing them luck, and walked out. Back in her private office aboard Nexus Prime Station, her composed expression finally cracked into something more determined. Her exhausted staff wanted to know what came next. Chen looked out at the endless traffic of ships and told them they were going home to do real work, their work. She ordered Operation Exodus to begin immediately. Every scrap of human technology, every reactor, every tool bolted to a wall, was to be removed and carried away. Colonies would be abandoned, but only after being stripped bare. When her assistant protested that they had spent years building those settlements, Chen reassured her that wherever they were headed next, they wouldn't need any of it. They'd build something far greater. The evacuation that followed stunned everyone watching. Galactic news networks had positioned cameras everywhere, anticipating chaos, tears, and desperate pleas to stay. Instead, humans worked with eerie efficiency. On one colony, settlers dismantled an entire town, fusion reactors and underground water systems included, within 17 days. On another, they hauled away entire orbital platforms. Elsewhere, They towed resource-rich asteroids into their departing fleet and evacuated 2 million people in just over a week. Reporters began calling it the Great Stripping, joking that humans would have hauled off the planets themselves if they could. What baffled outside observers most wasn't the efficiency, it was the mood. People losing their homes after 20 years of labor should have been devastated, yet they were practically celebrating. A journalist interviewing a cargo captain named Marcus Chen asked how it felt to be forced out. He grinned and said this was the best thing that had ever happened to them. No more council oversight blocking their research into ancient precursor technology, no more limits on expansion, no more restrictions on new weapons, engines, or artificial intelligence. Where they were heading, nobody could tell them no anymore. The interview went viral, and billions of alien viewers felt a creeping unease. These weren't defeated exiles, they were prisoners tasting freedom for the first time. Weeks later, Earth's President Adesanya addressed 40 billion citizens. She reminded them that the Council had expelled humanity as punishment, expecting gratitude for having tolerated their presence for 23 years. Instead, she declared the start of humanity's greatest era of expansion. The Council could keep its 70% of safe space. Humanity would claim the dangerous 30% nobody else wanted, the unexplored frontier littered with ruins and technology far older than any Council civilization. Within 5 years, she projected colonies on 500 new worlds, and within a decade, human presence beyond Council space would dwarf what they'd had within it tenfold. Her closing words were pointed. "Thank you for setting us free." The evacuation finished a full day ahead of schedule, with one final transmission broadcast on every frequency, gratitude and well wishes, then silence, absolute silence. No messages, no border crossings, no trade requests, as though humanity had disappeared from the galaxy entirely. At first, the older species were relieved. But normal life didn't return to normal. Within a year, one major merchant guild had lost 40% of its revenue. A once thriving manufacturing sector collapsed within 2 years after losing the competitive pressure that had forced it to innovate. Alien restaurants that once served popular human-inspired dishes withered without access to human recipes and crops. Even galactic entertainment felt hollow. Human music stories and ideas about freedom had vanished, and nothing had risen to fill that creative gap. But economic losses were the least of the Council's worries. Reconnaissance drones sent near the border returned baffling data. Massive, unexplained energy readings, construction on an enormous scale, and ships moving at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. One patrol encounter, when an alien vessel accidentally crossed into former human territory, revealed a human ship that was decades ahead of anything the Council possessed, better hull materials, an unknown power source, and weapons far exceeding Council military specifications. An emergency Council session soon confirmed the unthinkable. Intelligence estimates suggested humanity had built roughly 400 colonies in the supposedly uninhabitable frontier, grown their population from 40 billion to over 120 billion, and even constructed several partial Dyson spheres, a feat considered theoretical by most civilizations, accomplished by humans in only 5 years. Investigators concluded that humans had done exactly what everyone feared. They were reverse engineering ancient precursor technology, taming radiation zones, manipulating gravity, and repurposing long-dormant automated defenses instead of fleeing from them. Then came the leak that changed everything. 50 terabytes of human technical data spilled onto the Galactic network by an unknown source. It detailed wormhole-based transit networks that cut travel times from months to days, nanoscale manufacturing capable of building almost anything from raw atoms, planetary-scale artificial intelligence, and even early experiments in life extension and consciousness transfer. Scientists poring over the documents found that humans had explored more than 200 ancient ruin sites. Often at great cost, one installation alone had destroyed 17 ships, killed 34 researchers before contact was finally made with its ancient Guardian systems on the 18th attempt. Council scientists were floored by the numbers. Human energy output from just a handful of solar collector swarms exceeded the combined production of the entire council. Their population had tripled in 6 years. Their economy was growing 40% annually, on pace to surpass the entire council economically within 15 years and technologically within 20. Old divisions within the council deepened into open political fractures. Traditionalists insisted expulsion had been the right call, pointing to the human death toll from reckless experimentation. Younger species argued that at least humans were alive and growing, while the council merely maintained a slow, comfortable decline. Merchants blamed the departure for a return not to stability, but to stagnation. Quietly, something else was happening: emigration. Scientists frustrated by endless committee approvals, entrepreneurs seeking freer markets, and adventurous young beings began finding ways across the border into human territory. What started as a trickle became a flood the council couldn't stop with any law or border patrol. One immigrant engineer described spending 15 years failing to get a new design approved back home, only to have a human company build a working prototype within 3 months. Humans, he didn't ask if an idea was safe. They asked if it was worth trying. An economic study eventually confirmed the final piece of the puzzle. Humanity had built a post-scarcity society within its core systems, where energy and manufacturing were so abundant that traditional trade in goods had become almost meaningless. They now traded ideas, art, and experience instead. The presiding officer, visibly aged after years of stress, admitted to the assembly that their core assumption had been catastrophically wrong. Humanity hadn't collapsed without the council. It had transformed into something they no longer understood or controlled. 7 years after the expulsion, the same journalist who broke these stories, an ambassador named Krell, was finally granted permission to visit humanity's home system. She expected a slow, 3-day journey by council standards. Instead, a stunningly advanced human escort vessel met her within minutes, crossing 3 light years before she'd even finished her greeting. They traveled instantly through strange artificial gates that folded space itself, passing systems ringed with solar collector swarms, terraformed worlds, wild greenery with glittering cities, and a repurposed ancient alien installation now serving as a university attended by students from 40 different species. When she finally reached humanity's home system, it was almost unrecognizable from 7 years prior. Earth remained blue and green, but the space around it had become something like art. Habitat rings circling the planet, city lights blanketing the moon, and Mars slowly turning green under active terraforming. Thousands of ships moved through the system in perfectly coordinated patterns. Ambassador Chen, now grey-haired but carrying the same knowing smile, greeted her personally. Krell didn't waste time on pleasantries, laying out the council's concerns directly: unprecedented growth, market destabilizing economic expansion, and reckless use of precursor technology the council had avoided for good reason. Chen calmly explained that humanity simply wanted what it had always wanted: to grow, explore, build, and push past boundaries, and that leaving the council had simply let them finally do so without interference. When Krell pressed on the risks, Chen offered a parallel from Earth's own history: how humans had once faced deadly oceans, mountains, and unknown frontiers, and chosen to explore rather than retreat. She acknowledged that over 2,000 people had died pursuing precursor research in 7 years, each death remembered, each person having chosen the risk knowingly. Unlike the council, humanity refused to let fear of failure freeze its progress entirely. Chen made her final point unmistakably clear. Humanity no longer needed the Council's markets, technology, or permission. Everything necessary for growth already existed in the frontier space the Council had once been too frightened to touch. Krell, sent to attempt renewed negotiation between the two civilizations, was left with an uncomfortable realization. The balance of power had already shifted completely, and the Council was no longer negotiating from a position of equality. The Great Assembly Hall stretched wide enough to swallow an entire city hall. Its ceiling rose so high that the beings seated in the upper galleries looked like specks of colored light, and the air itself seemed to hum with the weight of history about to be made. At the very center of that impossible space stood a single human being, Ambassador Chen Wei. One person alone, surrounded on every side by thousands of alien delegates from hundreds of different worlds, their eyes, whether 2, 3, or clusters of a dozen, all fixed on her. Massive holographic screens floated above the chamber, casting her calm, steady face into every corner of the room, so that even the beings seated in the farthest galleries could see the smallest twitch of her expression. And that calm was strange. It was almost unsettling. Here was a woman standing trial before the single most powerful governing body in the explored galaxy, and she looked as though she were waiting for a routine appointment rather than a verdict that could reshape the fate of her entire species. The presiding officer of the council rose from his elevated seat. He was a Vorath, a tall, imposing figure covered head to toe in silver scales that shimmered and shifted color with every small movement, catching the light in ways that made him seem almost otherworldly, even among the other alien delegates. 3 eyes, arranged in a way no human face could replicate, studied Chen with unreadable intensity as he unrolled an ancient data scroll that floated weightlessly in front of him, its surface glowing with symbols in a script older than most of the civilizations present. He began to speak, and his voice, deep and resonant, was instantly translated into 800 different languages simultaneously, each syllable rippling outward through translation devices worn by every delegate in the chamber. "Humanity of Earth," he said, "you stand accused before this council of crimes against galactic harmony." The list of charges was long, and each one landed like a stone dropped into still water. Humanity had violated the harmonious expansion doctrine, settling 17 star systems without proper authorization from the Council's colonization board. Humanity had disrupted established trade routes across dozens of systems through aggressive pricing practices that undercut alien merchants who had operated those routes for centuries. Humanity had refused to limit its population growth in accordance with standard galactic protocols, protocols that every other member species had adopted without complaint. And the presiding officer said, his tone sharpening, and most concerning of all, humanity had spread its culture, its ideas, its restless individuality to other species with what he called reckless abandon. As he spoke, floating images bloomed into existence behind Chen, visible to every delegate in the chamber and broadcast simultaneously to trillions of beings watching from their homeworlds. The images showed human colonies blooming with light across distant, once barren worlds. They showed starships slicing through space at velocities that made older, more cautious species visibly uncomfortable. They showed human traders standing shoulder to shoulder with alien business partners, shaking hands and grinning, their wide human smiles unsettling to species that had never developed the same facial gesture and did not understand what it meant. They showed human music drifting through open-air alien marketplaces, human food being sold from street carts on 1,000 different worlds, and human philosophies about personal freedom and individuality spreading like wildfire among the younger, more impressionable species of the galaxy. Chen listened to all of it without a flicker of visible emotion. She had known this day was coming for months. The signs had been unmistakable: the tightening of visa restrictions, the sudden hostility in trade negotiations, the whispered conversations that stopped the moment a human diplomat entered the room. The older species feared change, and humanity, in barely 2 decades of interstellar contact, had become the very embodiment of change itself. The Council has deliberated. The presiding officer continued. We have reviewed testimony from 412 species. We have examined the evidence accumulated across your 23 years among us, and we have reached a decision. The chamber fell utterly silent. 847 species held their collective breath, a silence so complete that the faint hum of the translation devices was the only sound in the enormous hall. Humanity had only joined the wider galactic community 2 decades earlier, after finally cracking the secret of faster-than-light travel, a technology every other species in that room had possessed for centuries or millennia before humanity ever left its own solar system. And yet, in that short span of time, humans had caused more disruption to galactic order than some entire civilizations managed to cause in 1,000 years of existence. The vote has concluded, the presiding officer announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. 731 species vote in favor of expulsion. 116 vote against. The measure passes. A wave of sound rolled through the chamber like a physical force. Some species chirped in open approval. Others hummed or clicked their mandibles, or expressed satisfaction through gestures and vibrations that human ears could never hope to interpret correctly. But scattered among the celebration, quieter and sadder, were the sounds of distress from a handful of younger species, the ones who had grown close to humanity over the past 2 decades, who had traded with them, studied alongside them, and in some cases counted individual humans among their closest personal friends. The presiding officer raised one clawed hand, and silence returned, slower this time, more reluctant. Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth, he said, the Council hereby expels humanity from galactic civilization. All human embassies must close immediately. All human trade stations, regardless of size or purpose, must be dismantled. All human colonies located within Council-controlled space must be fully evacuated. You have exactly 1 solar cycle, 30 standard days, to remove your species' presence from our territory entirely. Chen nodded slowly, absorbing the sentence without protest. Furthermore, the presiding officer added, and now a distinct edge of warning crept into his tone, humanity is permanently forbidden from entering Council-controlled space in the future. This restriction encompasses approximately 70% of the currently explored galaxy. Any human vessel discovered within our territory after the deadline expires will be classified as a hostile incursion and dealt with accordingly, without further warning. He paused, studying her carefully with all 3 eyes. Do you understand these terms? He asked. Chen took a slow, measured breath. Around her, camera drones hovered silently, capturing every angle of her face and broadcasting the moment lived to trillions of beings scattered across hundreds of worlds. She understood with total clarity that whatever she said next would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years, perhaps decades to come. Some observers, watching from their homes light years away, fully expected her to beg for leniency. Others braced themselves for threats, perhaps even veiled ones about human military capability. A few softer-hearted viewers wondered quietly if she might simply break down in tears, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was happening to her entire civilization. Instead, Chen smiled. It was not a large smile. It was not a smile of defiance, nor mockery, nor bitter irony. It was small, quiet, and unmistakably genuine, the kind of smile a person wears when they receive unexpected, wonderful news they were not prepared for. It touched the corners of her eyes and made her look, for just a moment, years younger than the grey threading through her hair suggested. "We understand," she said simply. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying easily through the vast silent chamber without a single tremor. "We'll be gone in 30 days. A ripple of confusion spread visibly through the assembled delegates. The presiding officer's silver scales shifted color slightly, a subtle but unmistakable sign of surprise among his people. This was not, by any measure, the response anyone in that chamber had anticipated. "You do not wish to appeal?" the presiding officer asked, an unfamiliar note of uncertainty creeping into his otherwise commanding voice. "You will not request reconsideration of this verdict?" "No," Chen said, and her smile widened just a fraction more. "You've made your decision. We respect it. We will gather our people, and we will leave council space exactly as requested. Is there anything else the council requires of us?" The presiding officer exchanged a rapid series of glances with the other senior council members seated around him. Whispered conversations broke out in a dozen different languages simultaneously. The Zenithar representative, whose species had profited enormously from decades of human trade, looked almost panicked, his antennae twitching rapidly. The Zoltene delegation, among the eldest and most conservative species in the entire council, appeared deeply satisfied, nodding slowly to one another. The younger species in the gallery simply looked confused, and in some cases visibly sad. "No," the presiding officer finally said, recovering his composure. "There is nothing else. You are dismissed." Chen bowed slightly, a gesture of respect recognized across both human and most alien cultures present in that chamber. Then she turned and began walking calmly toward the enormous exit doors at the far end of the hall, her footsteps echoing loudly in the sudden, heavy silence that had fallen over the assembly. Every single eye in that chamber, human and alien alike, followed her progress across the vast open floor. Just before reaching the door, Chen paused. She turned her head slightly and looked back over her shoulder at the assembled representatives of 847 distinct civilizations, her smile still unfaded, still calm, still entirely genuine. "Thank you," she said, "for the opportunity, and good luck with everything." Then she stepped through the doorway, and it slid shut behind her with a soft final hiss. The presiding officer stood frozen at his podium for several long seconds. Around him, council members had already begun talking over one another, the noise building steadily into something approaching chaos. Something about the human woman's reaction had deeply unsettled every single one of them, though none could quite articulate exactly what it was. It felt, several delegates would later admit privately, like watching someone sentenced to permanent exile who seemed genuinely, inexplicably pleased about the outcome, like disciplining a child, only to have that child thank you sincerely for the punishment. Meanwhile, in the human section of Nexus Prime Station, far from the council chamber, Chen's carefully maintained composure finally broke the moment she stepped into her private office. Her staff had been waiting anxiously, and their faces betrayed the exhausting strain of the past several months of failed diplomacy. Some looked openly angry, others appeared to be on the verge of tears. They had spent years, in some cases their entire careers, trying to make humanity's uneasy place within the galactic community actually work. So, her assistant finally asked, breaking the heavy silence, what happens now? Chen walked slowly to the window and gazed out at the massive orbital station, at the countless ships arriving and departing in endless streams, at the entire visible galaxy spread out before her in all its vast, glittering complexity. Somewhere out there, in the direction the Council considered worthless and dangerous, lay the 30% of the galaxy that nobody else wanted, the dark, unmapped spaces. The hazardous regions filled with ancient warnings and abandoned technology, the frontier. "Now," Chen said, and the smile returned to her face, brighter and more certain than before, "we go home, and then we get to work, real work, our work." She turned to face her assembled staff directly, Send word to Earth immediately. Tell them to begin Operation Exodus. Every human currently residing anywhere within Council space is to return home without delay. And I mean absolutely everyone. We leave nothing behind. We take our technology, our ships, our equipment, all of it. If something isn't physically bolted to the ground, it comes with us. And if it is bolted down, then we unbolt it first. What about our established colonies here? Someone asked nervously from the back of the room. Abandoned, Chen said firmly, without a moment's hesitation. We take our people, and we take anything genuinely useful. The council can keep the empty buildings. But we spent years building those colonies, her assistant protested quietly, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. Chen's expression softened just briefly. I know, she said gently, but trust me on this. Where we're going, we won't need any of it. Where we're going, we get to build something far better than anything we've built here. She turned back toward the window, gazing out at the stars, at the vast, dark unknown beyond the boundary of council space. They think they're punishing us, she said quietly. They genuinely believe they're putting us in our proper place. Her smile grew wider, more knowing. They have absolutely no idea what they've just done. Outside the window, the very first human ships were already beginning to move, engines flaring to life as they started their long journey home. And across every vessel, every station, every human heart scattered throughout council space, the exact same electric message was spreading rapidly from person to person. The council had just set them free. The exodus officially began 3 days after the council's verdict was handed down. Across the full 70% of the galaxy where humans had established homes, businesses, and communities over the past 2 decades, the same simple message arrived and was received with an enthusiasm that stunned outside observers. Pack up, go home, time to leave. Galactic news networks had expected absolute chaos. They positioned camera crews at every major human colony across dozens of systems, anticipating dramatic footage of panic, desperate pleading, families fighting to stay, or humans begging local alien governments for emergency sanctuary. The older species, the ones who had voted enthusiastically for expulsion, watched with quiet satisfaction, expecting to see the arrogant humans finally humbled. The younger species who had opposed the vote watched with genuine pity, bracing themselves for scenes of heartbreak. Instead, what every single observer witnessed made absolutely no sense to them. The humans were efficient, terrifyingly, almost mechanically efficient. On the colony world of New Brisbane, human settlers completely dismantled their entire established settlement in just 17 days. They didn't stop at packing personal belongings. They methodically took apart their fusion reactors piece by piece. They carefully removed entire hydroponics bays, stripping them down to bare components. They even excavated and hauled away their underground water purification systems. Massive cargo ships arrived on precise schedules, were loaded with almost impossible speed and coordination, and departed exactly on time. The local Venor population, who had lived peacefully alongside these human settlers for 12 full years, watched in bewildered confusion as their longtime neighbors stripped the colony down to its bare foundation and left without any ceremony or farewell. "Why are you taking absolutely everything?" one Venar merchant asked a human engineer who was personally supervising the dismantling of an entire manufacturing plant. The building still functioned perfectly well. The equipment still works exactly as intended. Why not simply leave it behind for others to use? The engineer, a woman named Sarah Okonkwo, never once paused her work as she answered. Because she said simply, we might need every bit of it where we're going. Can't afford to leave good equipment behind. But where exactly are you going? The Venar pressed, genuinely curious now. Surely you're simply returning to Earth. Earth already has plenty of industrial fabricators of its own. Sarah smiled, and it was unmistakably the exact same knowing smile Ambassador Chen had worn back in the council chamber. Not to Earth, she said. Beyond Earth, way beyond. And trust me, we're going to need every single fabricator we can possibly carry with us. The Vinar merchant simply didn't understand, but Sarah had already moved on to her next task, methodically checking items off her digital clipboard with focused, unhurried determination. This exact same pattern repeated itself across virtually every human colony in Council space. On New Shanghai, human crews dismantled 3 entire orbital stations and packed every component into waiting cargo vessels. On Hope's landing, they went even further, using massive industrial tugs to physically pull resource-rich asteroids out of stable orbit and attach them directly to the departing Exodus fleet. On Terra Nova, an enormous logistical operation successfully evacuated 2 full million people in just 8 days, a feat that should have realistically taken many months to accomplish under normal circumstances. Galactic media outlets began referring to the entire phenomenon as the Great Stripping, because humans seemed determined to take absolutely everything that wasn't a permanent, unmovable part of the planet itself. Several reporters half-jokingly speculated that if humans had somehow possessed the technology, they would have found some way to take the actual planets with them too. But what genuinely disturbed outside observers most wasn't the remarkable efficiency of the evacuation. It was the prevailing mood among the departing humans. These were, by any reasonable measure, a people being forcibly exiled from civilized galactic space. They were losing their homes, their carefully built businesses, everything they had constructed and nurtured over the 2 decades of hard work. By every logical expectation, they should have been utterly devastated. Instead, they seemed genuinely, almost giddily excited. A reporter working for the Zine Broadcasting Network managed to secure an interview with a human cargo captain named Marcus Chen, no relation to the ambassador, as his vessel, the Shanghai Sunrise, prepared for its final departure from Nexus Prime Station. Captain Chen, the reporter began, her translator device carefully calibrated to convey an appropriately sympathetic tone. How does it feel to be forced to leave everything you've built behind? Marcus looked directly into the camera with bright, animated eyes and a wide grin that showed considerably more teeth than the reporter's species found comfortable. Forced, he repeated, almost laughing at the word itself. Lady, this is genuinely the best thing that's ever happened to us. The reporter's confusion was visible even across the significant species barrier separating them. I don't understand, she said. You've been formally expelled from galactic civilization. You're permanently losing access to 3/4 of known space. How could this possibly be considered good news? Marcus laughed again, louder this time. 'Cause now, he said, we finally get to stop playing by their rules. You want to know what the Council never let us do? They never let us properly experiment with precursor technology. Too dangerous, they always said. They never let us expand at anything faster than their carefully approved rate. Too aggressive, apparently. They never let us seriously research certain classes of engines, or weapons systems, or advanced artificial intelligence. Too risky, always too risky. He leaned in closer toward the camera lens. Well, guess what? Where we're headed now, there's no council left to tell us no. There's nothing out there but empty space, the ruins of dead civilizations, and more genuine opportunity than we honestly know what to do with. They think they're punishing us. In reality, they just handed us the keys to the candy store. But the regions beyond council space are considered fundamentally uninhabitable, the reporter countered. The radiation storms alone are lethal. The gravitational anomalies could tear a starship apart in seconds. There are rogue automated defense systems left behind by extinct civilizations. These areas have been marked as forbidden zones for literally thousands of years by every sensible species in the galaxy. Marcus's grin only widened further. Forbidden to who, exactly, he asked. Not to us. Not anymore. We're not council species now, remember. He affectionately patted the hull of his ship. Besides, dangerous just means nobody else was brave enough, or perhaps crazy enough, to actually go figure it out properly. Turns out humans happen to be both. That single interview went viral across the entire galactic communications network within hours. Billions of alien beings watched it, and a growing, uncomfortable sense of unease settled over many of them. These humans weren't behaving like a defeated, punished people at all. They were behaving exactly like prisoners who had just been unexpectedly granted a full pardon and immediate release. Back on Earth itself, the returning evacuation fleet arrived in a steady, unbroken stream. Ships descended from orbit carrying not just returning refugees, but entire disassembled manufacturing facilities, sensitive research equipment, and rare exotic materials painstakingly collected from dozens of different worlds over 2 decades. The orbital space surrounding Earth grew increasingly crowded with vessels of every conceivable size, from small personal transports to massive cargo haulers stretching for kilometers. But critically, these ships never stayed long. After unloading their human cargo and loading up fresh supplies, they departed again almost immediately, heading not back toward Council space, but in the exact opposite direction, toward the dark, unexplored regions, toward the forbidden zones marked with dire warnings in 100 different dead-lead languages. 3 full weeks after the initial expulsion verdict, the United Earth government held a global broadcast. President Adesanya stood before cameras transmitting her words simultaneously to 40 billion humans scattered across the solar system and throughout human-controlled space. Citizens of Earth and her colonies, she began, 3 weeks ago the Galactic Council formally expelled humanity from their organization. They intended this as harsh punishment for our supposedly excessive expansion and cultural influence. They apparently expected us to feel grateful for the mere 23 years they tolerated our presence among them. She paused deliberately, and a confident smile crossed her face. Instead, she continued, "I stand before you today to announce the beginning of humanity's greatest era of exploration and expansion in our entire history. The Council controls 70% of the explored galaxy. They are entirely welcome to keep it. We are taking the 30% they didn't want, the dangerous 30%, the unexplored 30%. The 30% filled with the ruins and lost technology of civilizations far older than any current Council member species. Behind her, an enormous holographic map materialized, displaying the entire galaxy rendered in 3 dimensions. The majority of the map glowed with soft blue light, representing established Council territory. But the outer edges, the vast spaces between the spiral arms, the dark regions extending above and below the galactic plane, all of these areas blazed brilliant red. There was, quite simply, an enormous amount of red on that map. "This is ours now," President Adesanya declared firmly. "Not through conquest, not through negotiation, simply by virtue of being the only civilization willing to actually go out and explore it properly. We have already begun formal settlement operations across 200 separate star systems within these regions. Within 5 years, we project active colonies on 500 separate worlds. Within 10 years, our total presence beyond the old boundary will surpass our former presence within Council space by a factor of 10. She turned to look directly into the camera lens, her expression fierce with unmistakable pride. "The Council feared our natural rate of expansion, even while we were playing entirely by their restrictive rules," she said. "They genuinely haven't seen anything yet. To every human currently still within Council space, come home immediately. Your real work is about to begin. To every human already safely home, prepare yourselves for the single greatest adventure in our species' entire history." And to the Galactic Council, who I know is watching this broadcast right now, considerable concern and confusion, I say simply this: thank you for setting us free. The broadcast ended, and across Earth and throughout the solar system, a cheer erupted that was nearly loud enough to be heard from orbit. Humanity had just been handed an enormous challenge, and every indication suggested they intended to meet it with absolutely everything they had. Back in the council chambers on Nexus Prime, the presiding officer watched the human president's defiant address with steadily growing alarm. Around him, other senior council members had begun quietly asking increasingly uncomfortable questions among themselves. Why exactly were the humans so genuinely happy about this outcome? What could they possibly know about those forbidden zones that the council itself did not? And most disturbing of all, unspoken but clearly on everyone's mind, what if expelling humanity had actually been a terrible mistake? But by that point it was already far too late to reconsider. The formal vote had been cast. The decision was legally final. And humanity was already moving steadily beyond the Council's reach, into spaces the Council itself had feared for millennia, carrying smiles on their faces and genuine hope in their hearts. The full human evacuation completed on day 29, a full day ahead of the official deadline. The very last human ship departed Council's space, with one final simple message transmitted across every available frequency. Thank you for the opportunity. Good luck with everything. And then they were simply gone, leaving behind nothing but empty colony buildings and eerily quiet spaces where human noise and restless energy had once filled every corner. The galaxy suddenly felt noticeably larger and somehow strangely lonelier without them. And out in the deep darkness beyond Council space, humanity quietly got to work. 5 years passed. The wider galaxy moved on, or at least it tried its best to. Within the council chambers, representatives continued gathering exactly as they always had, discussing routine trade disputes, minor border conflicts, and all the ordinary business of galactic civilization. But there remained a persistent empty feeling to it all, as though something genuinely important had gone permanently missing. Humans had only been formal council members for 23 brief years, yet their sudden absence left a hole far larger than that short membership period should have logically created. The Council had anticipated many possible outcomes following humanity's expulsion. They expected to hear desperate complaints and formal requests for reconsideration. They expected to detect human ships attempting to sneak illegally back into restricted Council territory. They expected, at minimum, ongoing problems of some kind. What they actually received instead was silence. Complete, total, unbroken silence. No transmissions whatsoever originated from human space. No ships ever crossed the boundary. No diplomatic messages, no trade requests, no outreach of any kind. It was genuinely as though humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy entirely. Long-range sensor scans of the Sol system showed clear signs of activity, energy signatures, and ship movements, but nothing that Council analysts could clearly identify or interpret. And beyond Sol, deep within the dark, unexplored spaces humanity had retreated into, sensor readings returned only strange, confusing data that made no coherent sense whatsoever. At first, the older, more conservative species felt genuinely satisfied. The disruptive human problem had apparently been successfully solved. Galactic life could finally return to comfortable normal. But normal, it turned out, wasn't quite the same anymore. One major merchant guild reported significant financial losses within the very first month following the expulsion. By the end of that first year, they had lost a staggering 40% of their total revenue. Human trading companies had certainly been aggressive competitors, yes, but they'd also single-handedly created entirely new markets and cultivated new customer bases that simply hadn't existed before. Without human participation, previously profitable trade routes were suddenly barely breaking even. An entire alien manufacturing sector collapsed completely within just 2 years. That sector had specialized in mid-grade technology, selling primarily to species who couldn't afford premium goods from more technologically advanced civilizations. But humans had aggressively entered that exact market with superior products at dramatically lower prices, forcing local manufacturers to innovate and improve simply to remain competitive. When the humans finally departed, those manufacturers quietly attempted to raise their prices back to previous levels. Their customers, having grown accustomed to genuinely better products at lower costs, simply stopped buying entirely. Even the alien restaurant industry, somewhat strangely, suffered significant losses. Human cuisine had become genuinely popular across hundreds of different worlds over 2 decades. Human chefs had introduced innovative fusion concepts, blending culinary elements from dozens of different cultures. Human farmers had generously shared crop varieties specifically bred to grow successfully in otherwise hostile environmental conditions. When humans departed, they took their recipes and their carefully cultivated seed stocks with them. Alien restaurants that had specialized in human-inspired cuisine either closed permanently or attempted, usually unsuccessfully, to recreate beloved dishes purely from memory. It simply wasn't the same. Even Galactic Entertainment felt the profound loss. Human music had spread across the galaxy with genuinely infectious speed and popularity. Human stories celebrating exploration and adventure had inspired countless young beings across dozens of different species. Human philosophical concepts regarding individual freedom and personal self-determination had actively sparked social movements on numerous conservative, tradition-bound worlds. Now, that particular creative energy had simply vanished entirely, and nothing meaningful had risen up to fill the resulting void. But these accumulating economic and cultural losses, troubling as they undoubtedly were, weren't actually what kept senior council officials awake at night with genuine anxiety. What truly worried them most was the mounting exploration data. The council had maintained tight control over exactly 70% of the explored galaxy for very good, well-established reasons. The remaining 30% was genuinely dangerous, filled with hazards that every single council species had ancient cautionary legends about. Radiation storms capable of frying a starship's entire electronic system within mere seconds. Gravitational anomalies capable of tearing a vessel apart at the structural seams. Automated defense systems left behind by civilizations so ancient that even their original names had been completely forgotten. And scattered everywhere throughout those forbidden regions, countless ruins belonging to species that had once risen to civilizational heights the current galaxy could barely even imagine, before eventually falling into extinction. The Council maintained extremely strict protocols regarding any precursor technology discovered anywhere within their territory. Don't touch it. Don't study it too closely. Never attempt to reverse engineer it under any circumstances. Simply too dangerous. Too fundamentally unpredictable. Entire promising civilizations throughout galactic history had reportedly destroyed themselves attempting to utilize technology they didn't properly understand. And so those dark, forbidden spaces had remained permanently unexplored for millennia, clearly marked on every galactic map with dire warnings, carefully avoided by every reasonably sensible being in existence. Every species, that is, except humans. The Council's Exploration Division eventually dispatched automated probe drones toward the regions immediately bordering human territory, attempting to quietly gather intelligence without actually crossing the forbidden boundary themselves. Those drones returned deeply disturbing information. They detected powerful energy signatures that theoretically shouldn't exist at all. They detected sensor readings strongly suggesting massive, ongoing construction projects. They detected distinctive radiation patterns closely resembling fusion reactors, hundreds of them, apparently all operating simultaneously. And strangest of all, They detected starships moving between systems at speeds that seemed genuinely, physically impossible. Faster than light travel itself was already well understood technology, but humans appeared to be traveling at rates far exceeding even standard, established FTL capabilities. One particular incident proved especially revealing. A Zithine exploration vessel, pursuing pirates through the border region, accidentally crossed directly into what had previously been human-controlled territory. They were immediately and efficiently intercepted by a human patrol ship. The Zithine captain, fully expecting an angry, hostile confrontation, was genuinely surprised by how politely the human crew handled the entire situation. Apologies, but Council species aren't currently welcome within this particular region, the human patrol captain stated calmly over open communication channels. You'll need to turn your vessel around immediately. The curious Zithine captain, despite the inherently awkward situation, couldn't help asking directly, "What exactly have you built out here?" The human captain simply smiled, that same unsettling, knowing smile every human seemed to share these days. "Wouldn't you like to know?" he replied. "But seriously, you really should leave now. Some of these particular systems still have automated defenses. We're actively in the process of mapping. Wouldn't want you accidentally getting hurt." "Automated defenses," the Zithine captain repeated cautiously. "You mean actual precursor technology? That's classified as extremely dangerous under every known protocol. The Council maintains extraordinarily strict guidelines regarding such technology." "Good thing we're not Council species anymore then, isn't it?" the human replied cheerfully, without missing a beat. "Now please turn your vessel around. We're being genuinely friendly about this request, but we will forcibly escort you out if that becomes necessary." The Zithine vessel retreated immediately, but not before its onboard sensors managed to capture detailed scans of the human patrol ship during the brief encounter. That sensor data was subsequently brought back to Council space and thoroughly analyzed by the very best available scientific minds. Their conclusions proved deeply troubling. The human vessel appeared to be at least 30 years technologically ahead of where it logically should have been. Its hull materials were significantly more advanced than anything currently in Council production. Its engine signature suggested an entirely unknown power source that theoretically shouldn't be possible given known physics. And its weapon systems, briefly activated during the tense encounter, registered energy outputs that significantly exceeded even the Council's most advanced military specifications. In just 5 short years, humanity had apparently achieved technological leaps that should have realistically required multiple generations of dedicated research. The presiding officer of the Council subsequently called an emergency special session. Delegates gathered together with a palpable sense of unease that simply hadn't existed 5 years earlier. This particular session, everyone quickly realized, wasn't actually about deciding what to do regarding humanity anymore. It was fundamentally about trying to understand what humanity might have already become. "We urgently need to address this deteriorating situation," the presiding officer announced, his once brilliant silver scales now visibly dulled by accumulated age and mounting stress. "The humans simply aren't behaving according to any of our original predictions. They were theoretically supposed to gradually stagnate without continued access to our established technology and trade networks. Instead, all available evidence suggests they're actively thriving." A senior Vorath intelligence officer then presented the Council's latest gathered findings. "Our current data strongly suggests the humans have successfully established colonies across approximately 400 separate worlds within the previously forbidden zones," she explained. "Their total population has grown dramatically, from an estimated 40 billion individuals to roughly 120 billion, achieved primarily through advanced medical technology combined with aggressive expansion policies. Perhaps most remarkably, they have successfully constructed at least 7 partial Dyson spheres surrounding stars within their claimed territory, providing them with energy resources that genuinely dwarf even our most technologically advanced member civilizations. A shocked, heavy silence immediately filled the entire chamber. Dyson spheres remained purely theoretical constructs for the vast majority of galactic species. Even attempting such an ambitious project was generally considered a multi-thousand-year undertaking under normal circumstances. The humans had apparently completed 7 of them within just 5 years. How is this even remotely possible? A young Venar representative asked, clearly troubled. Those particular regions are supposed to function as literal death traps. The ambient radiation alone should reliably kill anyone foolish enough to venture too far into them. The intelligence officer's expression remained deeply grim. It appears the humans have been actively utilizing the forbidden zones for exactly the purpose we always feared most, she said. They've been systematically accessing ancient precursor technology and successfully reverse engineering significant portions of it. The lethal radiation storms that reliably kill most other beings, humans have simply built properly shielded research stations directly inside them. The dangerous gravitational anomalies that we've always carefully avoided, humans actively studied them and apparently learned to manipulate gravity itself in ways we still don't fully understand. The ancient automated defense systems, humans either successfully destroyed them outright or, in many cases, actually reprogrammed them for their own purposes. That's genuinely insane, a Cathari elder interjected sharply. Precursor technology has historically driven entire civilizations to complete extinction. The associated risks are simply enormous, unacceptable by any reasonable standard. Yes, the intelligence officer agreed calmly. And yet, apparently, the humans ultimately decided the potential rewards were fully worth accepting those risks. And based on everything we can currently determine, they've actually succeeded far more often than they've failed. Another deeply uncomfortable silence settled heavily over the assembled chamber. Nobody present seemed willing to actually voice what everyone was clearly thinking simultaneously. By formally expelling humanity, by deliberately pushing them into those dangerous, forbidden spaces, the Council had inadvertently handed them direct access to the single greatest treasure trove of advanced technology anywhere in the entire galaxy, technology the Council itself had always been far too afraid to properly pursue. Then came the comprehensive report that ultimately changed absolutely everything. An independent journalist, a Zenithar named Krell, had spent 4 years diligently investigating the ongoing human situation. She had personally interviewed numerous refugees who had voluntarily left Council space for human territory, carefully collected leaked data from various confidential sources, and methodically pieced together a comprehensive picture of exactly what humanity had constructed beyond the old boundary. Her resulting report spread across the entire galactic communications network like an uncontrollable wildfire. Within that report, she revealed that humanity had successfully created something they called the Human Traverse, an extensive network of artificial wormholes connecting their entire claimed territory. Interstellar travel that should have realistically taken many months now took mere days instead. She described entire cities constructed directly around ancient precursor ruins, where dedicated human scientists worked tirelessly day and night attempting to understand technologies that were millions of years old. She showed smuggled footage, sourced from unknown origins, depicting construction projects on a scale that made even the Council's most impressive achievements look genuinely modest by comparison. The complete, unfiltered truth ultimately arrived not through any dramatic announcement, but through a massive, uncontrolled data leak. Someone, whose identity was never definitively established, released a staggering 50 terabytes of sensitive information directly onto the open galactic network. Technical specifications, detailed colony reports, extensive scientific research papers, comprehensive economic data, and complete construction blueprints. All of it originated from confirmed human sources. And collectively, all of it painted an unmistakable picture of exactly what humanity had managed to accomplish during 6 full years of exile. The leak simply couldn't be contained or suppressed. It spread throughout the network considerably faster than Council security forces could possibly shut it down. Within mere hours, curious beings across 800 different civilizations were actively reading about everything humanity had secretly built, and what they discovered made their previous concerns seem remarkably small and insignificant by comparison. Dr. Vinoth, a respected Stein astrophysicist, was among the very first Council scientists to properly analyze the leaked data. She sat alone in her laboratory aboard Nexus Prime, steadily working through document after document, her 3 distinctive eyes growing progressively wider with each successive page. Eventually, she called an urgent emergency meeting with several other Council scientists. "This simply cannot possibly be real," insisted Dr. Morvan, a respected Venar mathematician. "The underlying energy calculations alone are theoretically impossible." "The calculations are entirely correct," Venoth replied quietly. She displayed a detailed holographic chart illustrating humanity's total energy production. 7 separate Dyson swarms, she explained, each individually harvesting approximately 20% of their respective stars' total energy output. Combined together, they're currently producing more raw energy than the entire Council collectively. The assembled scientists stared silently at those staggering numbers. Energy production formed the fundamental foundation of any advanced civilization. Everything else that mattered, population growth, industrial capacity, technological advancement, military strength, all of it depended fundamentally on available energy resources. And humanity had just definitively surpassed 800 combined species in that single critical metric. But that alarming revelation proved to be merely the beginning. The leaked documents revealed project after ambitious project that should have realistically been impossible to achieve. Humans had successfully built sophisticated quantum communication networks, enabling truly instantaneous messaging across their entire claimed territory. They had developed advanced nanoscale manufacturing capable of constructing virtually anything directly from raw atomic elements. They had created remarkably sophisticated artificial intelligence systems capable of independently managing entire planetary economies. They had even begun preliminary experiments involving consciousness transfer and genuine life extension technologies. And most shocking of all, they had successfully accessed numerous precursor ruins and, crucially, actually survived the experience. The leaked documents included detailed research papers covering extensive precursor technology. Humans had apparently explored over 200 separate precursor sites, the physical ruins of civilizations that had fallen millions of years earlier. The Council had always considered such sites absolutely forbidden, far too dangerous to even approach. The few previous occasions when Council species had attempted studying precursor technology directly, the resulting outcomes had proven genuinely catastrophic. Entire dedicated research teams lost entirely, ships completely destroyed, sometimes even whole planets rendered permanently uninhabitable. But humans had approached the fundamental problem quite differently. Where Council species traditionally insisted on thoroughly understanding everything before ever touching anything, humans instead actively experimented. They deliberately poked at unknown things simply to observe what happened. They tested theoretical hypotheses by rapidly building working prototypes. They failed often, sometimes catastrophically, and yes, The leaked documents included detailed casualty reports that genuinely made Venoth feel physically ill reading them. But they also succeeded, repeatedly and crucially. Each individual success directly built upon accumulated previous knowledge. The leaked data included one particularly detailed report concerning a specific precursor installation located within a system humans had named New Alexandria. That installation had been protected by ancient automated defenses that had successfully destroyed 17 separate human ships before researchers finally managed to establish communication with the installation's ancient artificial intelligence systems. 34 individual people had died during those repeated failed attempts, but on their 18th documented attempt, they finally succeeded. They established genuine contact. They successfully learned the fundamental language of machines that were millions of years old. And when they ultimately gained access to that installation's complete technical database, they discovered detailed specifications for technologies that made current galactic civilization appear genuinely primitive by comparison. They're systematically reverse engineering absolutely everything, Venoth told her assembled scientific colleagues. Faster-than-light communication, artificial gravity manipulation, exotic matter production, direct energy-to-matter conversion. These clearly aren't merely theoretical concepts anymore. Humans are actively building fully functional working prototypes, but surely the associated risks. Dr. Morvan protested weakly. Precursor technology has historically driven entire species directly to extinction. Certain power sources are known to explode catastrophically. Certain weapons are theoretically capable of destroying entire stars. Certain nanotechnology applications could potentially transform whole planets into uncontrolled grey goo. We've deliberately avoided these particular technologies for extremely good, well-documented reasons. Yes, Venoth agreed calmly, and while we've certainly remained safe throughout that time, we've all simultaneously remained completely stagnant. Council technology hasn't meaningfully advanced in over 10,000 years. We simply maintain what we already possess, occasionally improving it incrementally at best. But genuine fundamental breakthroughs, those effectively stopped happening a very long time ago. She then pulled up another detailed document, this one displaying comprehensive population statistics. Humans have grown from 40 billion to 120 billion individuals in just 6 years, she noted. They've successfully colonized 400 separate worlds. Their overall economy is currently expanding at roughly 40% annually. And according to these current projections, within just 10 additional years, they will completely surpass the entire council in total industrial capacity. A heavy silence filled the room, weighted down by the enormous implications of what had just been revealed. The fundamental balance of power throughout the entire galaxy was visibly shifting, and the council genuinely had no clear idea how to properly respond to it. Significant political fractures within the council developed rapidly following these revelations. The council had traditionally maintained internal unity through careful consensus building and deep respect for established tradition. But the unfolding human situation created deep divisions that simply couldn't be papered over any longer. The older, more established species, those who had originally voted enthusiastically for expulsion, continued insisting they had made the correct decision. Humans are fundamentally reckless, declared High Chancellor Zeth of the Zelfine species during one heated session. They're actively playing with forces they clearly don't properly understand. Yes, they have certainly achieved impressive results, but at what genuine cost? How many individuals have already died pursuing their reckless experiments? And how many more will eventually die when they finally make some catastrophic mistake too significant to recover from? The younger species, many of whom had originally opposed the expulsion vote, viewed the entire situation quite differently. While humans actively take calculated risks and advance, argued Representative Senna of the Venar species, we simply sit comfortably in our stations and slowly decay. Yes, their chosen methods are undeniably dangerous, but they're genuinely alive. They're actively growing. They're actively building something meaningful. What exactly are we doing in comparison? Simply following ancient rules written by species that died out long before some of us even evolved. Meanwhile, the powerful economic faction, led primarily by the Zenithar Merchant Guild, harbored its own distinct set of concerns. We're currently bleeding substantial trade revenue, Guildmaster Tufok announced bluntly during one session. 17% of our established shipping routes are no longer genuinely profitable. 23% of our manufacturing partners have already permanently closed. And why exactly has this happened? Because humans fundamentally disrupted our established markets, and when they finally departed, they took that valuable market disruption directly with them. We haven't actually returned to genuine stability. We've simply returned to complete economic stagnation instead. Meanwhile, entirely outside of the Council's official awareness, something else significant was quietly happening: gradual emigration. It began quite small initially, a handful of frustrated scientists eager to study precursor technology without restrictive council oversight. A few ambitious entrepreneurs actively seeking markets with considerably less bureaucratic regulation. Adventurous young beings simply seeking genuine excitement and opportunity. They gradually found creative ways to establish contact with human space, successfully applied for appropriate visas, and quietly crossed the border. Then that initial trickle steadily became a genuine stream. Hundreds, then thousands, then eventually tens of thousands of beings originally from Council species voluntarily left civilized space entirely for human territory instead. The Council attempted stopping this growing exodus through various laws and formal regulations, but it proved about as effective as trying to stop flowing water using only a net. Determined people consistently found creative ways around every obstacle. A Cathari engineer named Drex was formally interviewed shortly after successfully immigrating to human territory. I spent 15 entire years, he explained, trying repeatedly to get official approval for a promising new engine design back in Council space. 15 years of endless committee meetings, exhaustive safety reviews, and detailed impact assessments. I finally arrived in human space, presented my original idea directly to a human company, and they simply said, "Let's immediately build a working prototype." 3 months later, we already had a fully functional model. 3 months. That's genuinely the fundamental difference. Humans don't reflexively ask whether something is completely safe first. They simply ask whether it's actually worth attempting. The Council watched this steady exodus develop with rapidly growing alarm. They were systematically losing their most talented and brightest individuals. The exact same beings who might have eventually led their own respective civilizations toward genuine technological advancement were instead actively choosing humanity over their own societies. Then came the comprehensive economic analysis that ultimately changed everything conclusively. A dedicated team of Council economists, led by the very same Zenithar journalist named Krell, who had originally broken these stories, published an exhaustive, comprehensive study of the entire human economic system. Her detailed findings were subsequently presented to the full Council during a specially closed session. Humanity has successfully created what they specifically term a post-scarcity economy within their core settled systems, Krell explained carefully. Energy has become so genuinely abundant that it's now essentially provided free of charge. Their manufacturing capabilities have become so remarkably advanced that they can produce virtually anything on demand. Food production has been fully automated to the point where hunger itself has effectively ceased to exist within their territory. They're no longer really trading in physical goods at all anymore. Instead, they're primarily trading in ideas, artistic expression, and genuine experiences. That's theoretically impossible, objected a Vath economist sharply. Scarcity itself forms the absolute foundation of any functioning economic system. Without genuine scarcity, meaningful trade simply cannot exist. Precisely correct, Krell replied. They've successfully moved entirely beyond traditional economic frameworks altogether. And that fundamental shift is exactly why our existing markets simply cannot effectively compete with theirs anymore. When they were still formal council members, they were still playing largely by our established economic rules. Now they're playing an entirely different game altogether. She then displayed several detailed projections. At their current sustained growth rate, human economic output will completely exceed the entire council's combined output within 15 years. Their overall technology will surpass ours within 20 years. And their total population will eventually become larger than our 10 largest civilizations combined within just 30 years. The presiding officer of the council, who had visibly aged considerably during the 6 years since the original expulsion, finally stood to address the full assembly. "We urgently need to discuss our available options," he said gravely. "It has become abundantly clear that our original core assumptions were fundamentally wrong. Humanity did not collapse or stagnate without our continued involvement. They thrived instead, and now they represent a form of galactic power that we neither control nor properly understand." 7 full years after the original expulsion verdict, Ambassador Krell's diplomatic vessel finally crossed the boundary directly into human space. She had sent formal advance messages requesting official permission to visit the Sol system and meet directly with current human leadership. The response she received had been notably polite, yet remarkably brief. "Permission granted. Welcome." What happened immediately afterward genuinely surprised her entire diplomatic delegation. A human escort vessel materialized within mere minutes of their border crossing. But this clearly wasn't the standard patrol ship described in previous council intelligence reports. This was something entirely different altogether. The vessel possessed a strange, almost impractical beauty, its whole surface seemingly shifting through different colors like oil floating on water, its overall shape organic and flowing, resembling a living creature considerably more than any conventional mechanical construct. And critically, it was remarkably fast. Sensor readings indicated it had traveled a full 3 light-years in roughly the same time it took Krell's own vessel to transmit a simple greeting message. Ambassador Krell, the human captain, announced pleasantly over open communication channels, "Welcome to the Human Traverse Network. We'll be escorting you directly to Sol. The total journey should take approximately 4 hours." 4 hours. Krell quickly checked her own navigation charts. Sol was located a full 12 light-years from the current border position. Even utilizing the Council's most advanced available FTL drive technology, that particular journey should have realistically required at least 3 full days. She said absolutely nothing in response, though her scales visibly shifted color slightly, betraying her genuine agitation. 4 hours. They subsequently entered what the humans specifically called a traverse gate, an enormous ring constructed from exotic matter floating impossibly in open space, something that theoretically shouldn't exist according to everything Krell had ever learned about fundamental physics. The gate activated smoothly, and reality itself seemed to twist and distort in ways her onboard sensors simply couldn't properly measure or interpret. And then, quite suddenly, they were emerging from an entirely different gate, located within a completely different star system altogether. "Welcome to the New Alexandria corridor," the escort captain announced cheerfully. We'll be making 2 additional jumps before finally reaching Sol. Please feel free to enjoy the view in the meantime. Krell gazed out through her viewport, genuinely struggling to properly comprehend what she was actually seeing. The star in this particular system was surrounded by an extensive partial Dyson swarm, thousands upon thousands of individual mirrors and energy collectors, steadily drinking in solar energy. But that impressive sight wasn't actually what caused her scales to visibly shift color again. It was the planet visible below, or more specifically, exactly what humans had done to that particular planet. The world had clearly been extensively terraformed, though not in any manner that Council species would readily recognize as familiar. The scattered continents glowed brightly with dense city lights, certainly, but between those gleaming cities lay vast expanses of green open space, forests and open fields that appeared genuinely wild and completely natural. And orbiting the planet itself were enormous structures that made virtually no logical sense whatsoever, elaborate rings and spheres and complex geometric shapes that seemed to somehow exist in more than merely 3 conventional spatial dimensions. "Is that actually a repurposed precursor installation?" one of Krell's diplomatic aides asked curiously, pointing toward a massive crystalline structure floating in high orbit. "It certainly was," the human escort captain confirmed. "We've since repurposed it entirely. It now functions as a university. Approximately 2 million students currently study there, representing roughly 40 different species altogether. 40 different species, actively studying within human space." Krell quietly filed that particular piece of information away for later consideration. They continued jumping repeatedly through the traverse network, system after system. Each successive system they passed through displayed unmistakable signs of massive ongoing development. Dyson swarms, extensive orbital habitats, entire planets actively undergoing terraforming. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, countless ships moving at seemingly impossible speeds throughout the extensive traverse network. Finally, after several jumps, they arrived at Sol itself. Krell had previously seen various images depicting humanity's home system, but those images were already 7 years outdated. What she witnessed now appeared almost completely unrecognizable compared to those older records. Earth itself hadn't actually changed all that dramatically, remaining blue, green, and undeniably beautiful as always. But the surrounding space around it had been thoroughly transformed into something approaching genuine art. Extensive orbital habitats formed complete rings encircling the planet, each individual habitat comfortably housing millions of residents. The moon itself had been so extensively colonized that its surface now glittered continuously with city lights. Even Mars appeared to be slowly transforming, showing unmistakable, early signs of active terraforming, with faint patches of green beginning to spread across its previously barren, rust-colored surface. Thousands upon thousands of ships moved smoothly throughout the entire system in remarkably coordinated, almost effortless patterns. Ambassador Chen, now visibly grey-haired but still carrying that exact same knowing, quietly confident smile, personally greeted Krell's delegation upon their arrival. Krell wasted little time on customary diplomatic pleasantries, instead laying out the Council's mounting concerns directly and candidly. Unprecedented, seemingly uncontrollable growth, significant ongoing market destabilization throughout Council territory, and what the Council still considered dangerously reckless exploitation of precursor technology, the Council itself had always carefully avoided for extremely sound reasons. Chen listened patiently, then calmly explained that humanity, at its core, simply wanted exactly what it had always genuinely wanted from the very beginning: the fundamental freedom to grow, to actively explore, to build ambitious things, and to continually push meaningfully past established boundaries. Leaving the Council behind, she explained, had simply finally allowed them to pursue those goals without constant external interference or restriction. When Krell pressed further regarding the substantial associated risks, Chen offered a thoughtful historical parallel drawn directly from Earth's own past. She described how humans had once faced deadly, unexplored oceans, imposing mountain ranges, and entirely unknown geographic frontiers, and had consistently chosen determined exploration over cautious retreat every single time throughout their history. She openly acknowledged that more than 2,000 individuals had tragically died pursuing precursor research over the preceding 7 years, but emphasized that each individual loss was properly remembered and honored, and that every single person involved had knowingly and willingly chosen to accept that inherent risk themselves. Unlike the Council, she explained, humanity simply refused to let persistent fear of eventual failure completely freeze all meaningful progress indefinitely. Chen ultimately made her final point unmistakably clear. Humanity no longer genuinely needed the Council's markets, its guarded technology, or its formal permission for anything. Everything truly necessary for continued growth already existed within the vast frontier space the Council itself had always been far too fearful to properly explore. Krell, who had been specifically sent to attempt renewed diplomatic negotiation between the two increasingly divergent civilizations, was ultimately left with a deeply uncomfortable realization. The fundamental balance of galactic power had already shifted completely and irreversibly, and the Council was clearly no longer negotiating from anything resembling a position of genuine equality.